Today we're in Tamworth Borough Council chambers and I'm talking to the leader of the council and the leader of the opposition of the council. Would you like to introduce yourselves, gentlemen?
Thank you. Yes, I am Councillor Danny Cook and I am the leader of Tamworth Borough Council.
Hello there, I'm Simon Peeple and I'm the leader of the opposition on Tamworth Borough Council.
The brief today is to find out a little bit about how the council works and operates and your roles. First of all, Danny, can you explain your role to us?
I can, yes. Every year in May, after the elections, there is what's called a council AGM, where the council will elect a mayor, a deputy mayor and a leader of the council. It's a democratic vote of all 30 councillors. Once the leader is elected, and I'm fortunate enough to be the leader at the moment, the leader will take on what's known as a strategic lead of the council. So basically, it's the lead policy setter. The leader will then set a cabinet that have particular areas of responsibility. And what the leader's job is to pull it all together to make sure the jigsaw fits, because nothing ever sits truly in isolation. Everything has to knit together, and it's the leader's job to ensure that everything is pulling together.
Thank you. And Simon, what's your role as leader of the opposition?
Thank you. My role as leader of the opposition is to lead the party which is the next largest, so the main opposition party, if there's more than two in the chamber. And my job is to give a strategic direction to that opposition group. Now, clearly, our role is not to set the policies, but on the other hand, to challenge and question and see how we think the policy might be improved or discussed. And probably a key part of my role is to judge those times when it's appropriate for the opposition to support the leader or the main group on the council. So, for example, we've recently worked very closely together for the appointment of the new chief executive roles, because that was something that was very important for the whole council, and so we worked together. So it's making that judgment as to when to challenge and when to work, but always constructively.
Yep.
Thank you. The next thing I'd like to ask you is this your full-time job?
No, it's not my full-time job. To be honest, I am a full-time logistics manager for a very, very large retail group. The standard allowance, as it must be known, to a councillor to attend meetings is £5,000 a year to a councillor. As you take on more and more responsibility, you get what's known as an SRA, a special responsibility allowance. Mine currently sits at around £13,000, so my all-in package is around £18,000 a year. Unfortunately, single father, 2 kids, ain't going to pay the bills.
No. And Simon?
Well, in a similar way, obviously the same basic allowance is paid. As leader of the opposition, I get the same again effectively, so just about 10,000. It's not my main income. It hasn't been until I retired in July, but obviously now retiring from teaching, I have a pension and so on. So there's no way over the last 20 years that I've been on the council that I would have paid the bills using that whilst bringing up a family. So it's very much a recognition of the time and commitment that people have to give to the job on top of what they can do to earn a living.
That leads quite nicely to my next question. Roughly, how much time do you give to this role?
It would be easy to say 24/7. There is no turning off, and I'm sure Simon would agree with that. If I was to honestly pull a figure out the air, if I was to say at this time of year, around 20 hours a week. As we move towards February and the budget being set, I'd say up to 30 hours a week. As I've just said, I have a full-time job, so I've got to work that around that, and also time with my children. So it's about good time management, but the hours can get rather large sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, that's broadly true of everybody. If you're in the cabinet, if you're leading the opposition at certain times, the workload rises or falls. And also, I think for leaving aside our 2 special roles, a lot of ordinary councillors will be coming in, they will be attending meetings on a regular basis, and they will be picking up inquiries from the area they represent. And that can fluctuate. It's often more at certain times of the year. It's notoriously more at the time when the council bills go out and people ask questions about what they're getting or not getting, and that just happens, and it's part of the rhythm of a council year. So the amount of time fluctuates, and one of the good things is that there are roles that don't require as much commitment as Danny's outlined, and therefore people can become councillors, get involved, begin to get the experience that means that they can fulfil a larger role when that is appropriate.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you've got your particular roles. How long do you stay within that role?
Nobody stays in them forever.
Exactly.
I'm fortunate enough to have been in the current one for 8 years. Mm-hmm. I've got to say it's been a very long 8 years, but I've had some good support around me with some good cabinet members. It'll go on as long as it goes on. I don't particularly have a date at the moment, but we're in the hands of the electorate. It's coming back to the question about, is this your full-time job? It's difficult to plan a full-time job around. The electorate can go a different direction at any given time. So I don't have a date set on it, but I know very well it won't go on forever, as I'm sure Simon would agree.
Yeah. The thing is, as Leader of the Opposition, I've been fortunate enough to be Leader of the Opposition since 2014, so not as long as Danny's been Leader of the Council, but you hold those posts at the pleasure of your group. Yeah. So each of us not only faces the electorate every 4 years, but you also have annual votes in your group, and that's not to say every group does that.
Yes.
And basically, we will have a meeting just after the election where whoever's been elected will then vote on who they want to lead the group, who the deputy leader is, etc. And then depending on party rules, the leader does pick or picks from a certain group of people. So that if they need to form a cabinet. So if I had the opportunity to lead the council, then the Labour Party rules tell me whether I get a choice of who they are or whether it's picked from a certain group. Danny's the same. And we just work within that. But every 4 years, you face the electorate and you're personally, and every year, apart from the year when the county council elections are on, we face them as a party. So we can't plan on being a councillor beyond a certain date. I personally have never put the dates for the following year's meetings in my diary. I kind of pencil in the annual council meeting because I need to know, because there's not long after the election. But I just don't believe you can take anything for granted. I've lost one election. But I've been on the council 20 years overall. So you just plan around the fact that if the electorate want you there and the electorate to put your party in either opposition or government, then you work around that.
Now, obviously, at the moment, I realise that there's an election for the council on an annual basis. Can you explain why there's an annual election, although we keep some of our councillors for longer than that?
Yeah, but basically it's what's called the election by thirds. So one third of us are up each time, and there are 10 wards. So one person is up every year in that ward, and then 4 years later they're up again. So basically each time they will run for 4 years. The gap year is the county council election year when none of us are up for election. And so in any given year, you'll find that some of us are up for election, some of us have got another couple of years, some of us have got 3 years to go, and that rotates through, and different people will get on. Occasionally there are by-elections, so those people will fill the gap for the remainder of the term of the person they replaced. So they could be up for a year, 2 years, depending on how long that person had left.
It's the term, not the individual.
Yes.
It is worth noting on that. I mean, the two models that are currently in this country for councils are the all-out election, where everybody's up for election all at the same time, or as Simon's just rightly pointed out, our system of thirds, so practically every year. Now, both me and Simon have spoke about this in the past, and we both agree we wouldn't look to change thirds in Tamworth, because it gives the public of Tamworth an opportunity to state their feelings about the council every year, or even change the controlling group at the council should they be so dissatisfied. So rather than waiting 4 years, the public through the elections process has an opportunity every year to say if they're happy or not. So that's why I support elections in thirds.
And also it means that you can see whether there's a gradual change, whereas I think both of us would agree that sometimes we're very much caught on the tide of national politics, and therefore you could have an all-out election at a time when one party is particularly popular or unpopular, and actually at local level you could have a complete sea change when people locally wouldn't have been going for that particular change just on one big go.
Yeah.
And both of us have seen the council veer to 28, 29 members of one group and hardly anyone from the other group. And actually you usually get better government at a local level when it's around about 20 to 10 or somewhere in between the two, because then the controlling group can't be too sort of sure of themselves, because actually a couple of elections could see them erode their lead, and equally the opposition's got to stay up to the mark because they might actually end up having to pick up the pieces. So you neither can be too categoric about their future, and it's good. When it gets beyond those points, it does lose some of the effectiveness that you'd hope for normally.
One thing that I'd just like a little bit of explanation on now is the committees. How does a councillor get to either choose the committee that they sit on or to be elected to that committee?
Well, you get into the realms of the Local Government Act 1972, but to break through the complication of that, we have what's known in national legislation political balance. So if you take, for example, at the minute, there are 20 Conservatives and then 10 opposition councillors. That means of every committee, the Conservatives, who are the current controlling group, and it would be Labour if they were the controlling group, get 66 or 2/3 of every committee. It's then up to the leader of that group, myself and Simon, as the two leaders of the groups, to allocate our members where we think they're best placed to represent their residents, or they may have a personal skill set. I mean, for myself, I have a logistics background, so if somebody else would lead, they might push me in a direction around planning and infrastructure. So it's about using your members where you feel they're going to give of their best and represent the residents as best they can. But that's how committees are selected.
And if a particular member is returned in the election at the meeting in May, we might say, well, you've been sat on that committee for a while, you've got experience, particularly if it's something like planning or licensing where it's quasi-judicial, and therefore the training, the experience, the being used to the kinds of issues that matter to make a decision rather than the pure policy ones, which all councillors will learn and gradually acquire anyway. So those people will be at function there. We do give people a choice. Certainly once Danny and I have worked out how many are actually on each committee, then we will say to our group, what would you like to do? I always try and give everybody at least one of the ones they would like to be on.
A willing servant is better.
Absolutely. But also because there's usually a reason they're either particularly skilled at it, or they've built up knowledge, or it fits their area. So, they will get into that, and then we work from that. And what has been a development of recent years is that some of the scrutiny committees, which are the ones that look at what is going on either in health or in education or in development of services and so on, those committees have developed working groups, and those tend to be self-selecting. So, for example, someone with a particular interest in vehicle energy, for example, electric cars, might sit on the working group on, are we needing to provide facilities for electric cars? And another person might say, well, I'm particularly interested in the school buildings in a particular area that are threatened with being knocked down, so I want to sit on that working group. And that way, we're not only focusing people's interest, but we're also getting them to think about their patch as well. So it works well on that basis.
It is worth remembering we're all laymen. None of us are local government professionals. We are members of the public, elected by the public to represent the public. So if we do have a particular skill set, if we can target that into research and policy development, it's an added bonus. So we do look to try and do it.
And sometimes the debates reflect experience gained. So someone who is currently in the opposition might be quite a testing person on somebody who's currently in the cabinet, because they used to have that role, or because they've got particular expertise built over years on that particular area. And when they ask a question, it's going to be very interesting and worth thinking about. And we had a meeting recently where one cabinet member was at a committee, and you could sense that two or three of the questions that were asked really were worthwhile points, and you could see them write it down thinking, I need to know the answer to that. Not that the officers are in any way less than professional, but sometimes you think, well, if they can ask that question, I ought to know what the answer would be, so that when it comes to a full policy. So that's how we inform the debate and each other, and that's how it works.
Well, talking to you both today, I can see both of your commitment and enthusiasm towards Tamworth and your electorate. Just as a point of interest, if someone is interested to become a councillor, what is the process that they need to go through?
Well, there's two routes. First one is join a political party where your own beliefs sit, and that political party will help you through the process. Both our political parties carry professional election agents that will take you through the paperwork and the process right up to polling day, should you win or not win. If you're not politically motivated and just want to stand to represent your street or your area and be an independent councillor, then the best recourse would be to speak to the elections officer at Tamworth Borough Council. Those details can be found on the website, who will show you how you fill in the paperwork. We've got to remember democracy is absolutely vital to our country, so there's a lot of legality around it, a lot of paperwork to make sure it's legal and above board, and nobody can spend millions buying an election. There's caps on expenses, so you need that advice. But that advice is out there if you go and seek it.
And I think the other thing that's very important is the majority of people come through a political party, therefore they will come forward through having convinced their colleagues in the party that they are good enough. They will probably have fought a totally unwinnable seat before they end up getting one they can win, although I have to say that it doesn't always work like that. I remember I was encouraged back in 1995 to come back, and I agreed, well, all right, but I'll stand for one of the least winnable seats because, I'm not sure with the young family if I'm yet ready to go back on the council, and then won because that year we did well. And another year, a councillor who thinks they're going to carry on doesn't, and it's just the way that these things fall. But most people will get back into it through an involvement in politics, getting involved with people that they feel they share values with. But one really good thing about it is that, and why it really matters the way it's done in Britain, is that we respect each other all the way through. And during the last general election, I was the agent, and a long-standing colleague on the council was the agent for the Conservatives. And when we had the awful atrocities and things, we were able to communicate with each other, text each other saying when campaigning would begin again, and we were able to act in a mature way.
It's a gentleman's game.
And the other night we bumped into the MP. He was out canvassing, we were canvassing, and we had a little bit of banter between us. And I said to someone that what's really nice about that is that we can do that. That even in the chamber when it can get very heated, Danny and I have often said, each of our sides expects us to take lumps out of the other.
Yes.
Because that's our job as leader of our group. But when we walk out of the chamber, we shake hands on it. We know it's not personal. It's about politics, and politics doesn't get beyond what should be appropriate in your respect for everyone else.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it's ideology at the end of the day. It's not warfare. I think what you've got in this chamber is 30 councillors, and I mean this, who genuinely care about Tamworth and want to do the level best. What we might differ on sometimes is the direction to take us there. But we all want the best for Tamworth.
Thinking about the best for Tamworth, few people might wonder what they can ask you to do. What powers do you actually have? And sometimes maybe a little bit confusing the roles between the town council, Tamworth Town, and Staffordshire as a county. Can you, between you, clear and clarify that a little?
Yes. Well, obviously, the difference between the two councils is Tamworth Borough Council is very much a local delivery council, so we will empty dustbins, pick up litter, maintain parks, cut grass, the stuff you see day to day.
Yes.
The County Council is the bigger strategic body that looks after the whole of Staffordshire, whether it's roads and highways, education, adult social services, etc. So it's about the size of the service sometimes, and also how local the delivery is. There are some blurred lines as well. The power we have as councillors is to set the policy of the council. So we will debate and decide between, controlling group and opposition, sometimes agree, sometimes don't, as Simon mentioned earlier. And we will set the direction and the policy. We will decide what's important. Now, it's a line I hate, and I hated it for years, is when the public say, you're officer run. Well, of course the council's run by officers, that's what they're paid for. So the day-to-day operations of the council are managed by very professional people who are paid to do so. What we have set is the policies they will work to and the direction they will go. So if a member of the public should approach us and say, I want this now, if it's not within that policy framework, a councillor can't instantly change that. We would need to review the whole policy. So if somebody thinks just speaking to a councillor will get you what you want, it's not always that clear cut.
I think it's very important to remember that Tamworth Borough Council is a relatively small council. There are massive strategic decisions made in Westminster and in the county which decide what's happening in the sense of the policy. So, for example, if universal credit is rolled out by the government, then Tamworth will be carrying it out. There's no choice. And the job then is the one that we've agreed on, which is how that policy will be implemented, or what phasing will be required, or whether we take part in a pilot scheme might be decided here. But we're not going to be able to ignore those big policies. But then also something that local councillors need to, anyone becoming one would need to remember is you're not there to get a special favour for somebody, yourself or anyone else. There are very strict rules about our dealings with the council, but very importantly, the person who comes to you and says, I haven't got X, Y or Z that they want, we have to see that they are dealt with properly, that if they are entitled to X, they get it. But if they're not entitled to it, we're not entitled to make it happen for them, because that's not what the rules are there for. The rules are there to say, if Danny deserves a particular thing to be done for him, I, as his representative, make sure it happens. And if he's not getting what he deserves, then I should make sure that it does happen. But he and I know that we are not there to say, well, actually, because I've asked for it, do you mind if, and that is a very important part. So anyone who wants to come on the council, it's really important to understand that you can represent, you can put your views forward, but you've always got to make sure that it's fair and that it's right and that it's proper. And that's the balance. But I think when Danny says about us all wanting the best of Tamworth, that's part of the point. You talk to anybody and they're dealing with somebody on a particular area, and yes, it's very important to them to get it right and deliver that service. But it's not there to make it unfair to someone else,
I think so. Just coming back on that point, Simon, it's also sometimes how you get there. I think what's important to residents is they've all got the same opportunity, the same outcome, the same result. Sometimes how you get there can be a different roadmap, because the council officers may not be aware of a particular medical need or a particular education need that this individual might have that might be blocking, and a councillor might be able to unblock that and help them through a different path get to the same outcome as everybody else. So you can help facilitate, but you can't just walk in, snap your fingers and say, today I want that wall knocked down. It just doesn't work that way.
And one of the very first case I dealt with it was years ago, was a chap who'd been made redundant. He was going to lose his house in a very upset state. He'd come into the council and said, I'm losing my house, I need a house. And they said, well, yes, but you can't just have a house because you've asked for it. And he had a young child and he was very upset. He contacted me and I said, well, did you show them the letter that says that your mortgage is being stopped and you're going to lose your home? And he said, well, no, I just went in, so, going in with him and saying, here's the letter. And of course, then the council staff said, oh, right, fine, but they had nothing to go on. And the outcome then for him was the same as for everyone else. But we'd made up for the fact that he couldn't, at that moment, in the degree of upset, express what was going on. And that's so often the case. The council provides that facilitating route through that opens up the right door, the correct door, that makes sure people get a fair outcome.
We can sometimes provide the emotion to it. Yeah.
Well, in fact, we take it out sometimes because we have to, don't we? Because we're saying, well, actually, these are the paperwork and here it all is. And they're saying, oh, right, OK, that's really helpful because we now know what it is that's driving this person's situation.
Are we sitting at the front of the chamber today? Are these your normal places of action?
20 years ago, I had the privilege of sitting there as mayor. that chair is reserved for the mayor, which is why we're not sitting in it today.
Protocol, we're not allowed.
You know, just as if you went to the House of Commons, you're not allowed to sit on the seats because you're not an elected member, and so on, and the same with there. And normally, Danny and I are squaring up to each other in those two rows there. Many years ago, I was deputy leader of the council, and I was sat over that side. And like the House of Commons, if power changes, then the party that is in control always sits on that side of the chamber. And that's how it works in a normal way. And when the mayor comes in, we all stand. And it might look very formal, but what it does is bring the meeting to a clear start. And when the meeting's over, the mayor stands up, everybody stands up, nobody can talk when the mayor's on his feet. And all that brings order and brings calm to the whole thing. So that's how it operates.
Absolutely, and it's worth remembering that while I am the leader of the council, in this chamber I answer to the mayor just as much as everybody else. It's the mayor's chamber.
Yes, the mayor couldn't tell each of us to sit down if he wants something to... like the Speaker in the House of Commons, if he stands up and says no, then everyone has to stop while he explains what he wants to happen or not to happen, or, you know, to persuade other people to listen more, or whatever it is that's not happening that the mayor wants to happen.
So basically he's taking almost the Speaker's role.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. Similar model.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very similar model.
I'd like to thank both of you for your time and your obvious commitment to Tamworth. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Cheers.